Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us back here at Feeding His Sheep. Today, we're going to complete the second half of Daniel chapter 11. Personally, this has been one of the most challenging chapters I've ever studied, but it's also been one of the most rewarding. In the first 20 verses that we covered in the last study, Gabriel laid out a prophecy after prophecy in incredible detail, and it made me wonder how Daniel was able to keep up with all of it. He was already overwhelmed by the angelic visit and the pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. I mean, this is so much to take in all at once, and we're not even done yet. I also imagine Daniel was perplexed by what he had been told. In our time, we have the luxury of seeing how so much of this has already come to pass. In the last study, all we did was lay out the prophecies verse by verse and then see how history recorded what God foretold when it came to pass. One pastor I listened to said that God was just showing off in chapter 11 of Daniel, and indeed, it has fortified my faith in the omniscience of our God. Only He can know the future so well, and only He is sovereign over the events of human history. In the remainder of this chapter, we're going to pick up with a man who was the most evil out of all of the rulers by that time, Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. We've already covered him in some detail in chapter 8. Verses 21 through 35 are going to be more stuff about Antiochus and about Syria. These things were also prophetic to Daniel and those who lived in the Old Testament days. But as I said, we live in a time where we have seen how they have been fulfilled. These verses will cover a time frame from roughly 175 to 164 BC. This was during the portion of time between the testaments when people said God was silent. God didn't have to say anything. Everything He had already said was now playing out on the world stage. And as we see more of how perfectly and completely these predictions come to pass, keep that in mind when we get to verses 36 through 45, because these have yet to be fulfilled. That's all that's left to take place. From that point on, the narrative will shift to the things that are still prophecy and things that describe the end times. But if what we have read so far come through with imperfect detail, 100% accurate, I have no doubt that verses 36 through 45 will be the same way. So in chapter 11 of Daniel, let's go ahead and kick off with verse 21. In his place, a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. In Daniel 8, this man was called the small horn, which grew exceedingly great. Now, though this man was vile and extremely wicked and an enemy of the people of God, he was just a man. And as we said before, he is a sneak preview, a foreshadow of the supernaturally evil Antichrist that is to come. So many things that this Antiochus Epiphanes does, he does them in a way that will emulate the coming evil one. Verse 21 said that his kingship had not been conferred, but nobody really openly contested it. He just ran with it. And the reason they did not recognize him as royalty was the rumor that he had been the one to kill his older brother, instead of him being killed over raising taxes or robbing a temple. The true heir, Demetrius Soter, was held hostage in a prison in Rome. Seleucus had another infant son, so Antiochus named him co-regent or ruler of that until that child came to age. But of course, there was never any intention of giving the crown to that child once he grew up. And it's also believed that he killed him as well. So he came to power in a time of peace. Other than that untimely but convenient death of anyone else who could legally rule, it says he would seize the kingdom by intrigue. Antiochus was a master of political intrigue. In his early years, we will see his shrewdness and his manipulation tactics to get what he wants. He flattered and gave tributes to kings everywhere. He just buttered everybody up. And it's been said that the Antichrist will also come in like that, promising peace, promising safety, speaking of great things. He will seem like a pacifist. He will pretend to be unwilling to accept each promotion that will be given to him until he reaches the top. But any visage of humility in that guy is just a mask. As time goes on during the tribulation, his true colors will begin to show bit by bit. Eventually, that mask will come off and his true colors will be revealed at the 3.5-year mark of the 7-year treaty with Israel. I sometimes wonder if Antiochus Epiphanes read these prophecies and tried to do these things because maybe he believed that he was the Antichrist. I wonder also if the coming Antichrist will read these things done by Antiochus in things past and just copy them and add to his list of abominations that he is going to do. But either way, God already knew everything about Antiochus, and God already knows everything about the man of perdition. So let us continue on and get verses 22 through 27. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, and he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army. So the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Verse 22 begins with an overwhelming army being swept away before him. Well, both it and the prince of the covenant will be destroyed, is what it said. This refers to the many victories that Antiochus will have in the beginning. In the previous study, which covered Antiochus, we went through about how he had the high priest killed, and he installed a person who would do his personal bidding. I think that may be the one referred to here as the prince of the covenant, the high priest Onias III, who Antiochus Epiphanes ordered to be killed in 172 BC. Verse 23 says, after an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception. He will make a peace treaty with no intention of keeping it for long. Well, the nation of Israel will also suffer from a broken treaty and promises from the Antichrist as well. So you can see how one of these guys is a picture of the one that is to come. He made a treaty with Egypt. For decades, Syria and Egypt had fought back and forth. All in the first half of chapter 11, we covered this, and poor Israel was just caught between them, as we saw in the first 20 verses. In 170 BC, Antiochus broke his promise, and he attacked Egypt. He conquered everything but Alexandria, and he captured King Ptolemy VI. Now, Egypt was now allies with the rising power of the nation of Rome, and Antiochus was careful not to attract too much attention in this war, so he released Ptolemy VI and let him continue ruling there, but as a puppet king. He still had to do his bidding. Verse 24 showed him again buttering up the people. He had did something that nobody of the Syrians had done before. He divided all the plunder and loot that they had won with the people. Maybe he called it a stimulus check, who knows? But it's an effective way to bribe other people into helping him and into serving him. Did you also notice the words at the end of verse 24? But only for a time. His victories through lies and through deception are going to be very short-lived. You can only pretend to be a friend to someone and stab them in the back once. They're not going to fall for it a second time. He once again pretended to be friendly and went to attack the only part of Egypt he had no control over, Alexandria. The Egyptians had enough, and they sent a courier to Rome asking for help, and the Senate dispatched Gaius Populus Laenus to Alexandria. On his way there during the beginning battles, Antiochus ran into that general, but he wasn't worried at first. He had met this general before in Rome. He had buttered him up before. He was on friendly terms, but not this time. It is said that that general drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus and demanded to know if he would surrender and pay tribute to Rome. And he would have to know before Antiochus stepped out of that circle. Well, left with no choice, he swore to leave Egypt and Cyprus alone. Now, beginning here, this is the first of the next kingdom that Daniel prophesied about, the Nebuchadnezzar's dream with the statue. Greece had long been divided into 4 parts and had lesser and lesser power, and now Rome is starting to take over. Finally, Rome has some dominion over an area where they previously did not. Let us go ahead and get verses 28 through 30. Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. At the appointed time he will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Antiochus returned with the plunder that he had already taken, but in a manner of speaking, his tail was tucked between his legs in defeat. Rome now has him on a leash. He promised Rome he would be a good boy, but he wasn't very happy about it at all. These ships of Kittim that were mentioned in verse 30 are said by some to be from Cyprus, and others say they were the naval fleet from Rome that was sent to stop him from attacking Egypt. Either way, he has been whipped and he is forced to go home. Now, have you ever mentioned or witnessed how some people can just absolutely be poor sports after a loss in a competition, like at a ball game, for example? And it's even worse when the coaches and the players and everything look up to the person that's throwing the tantrum. You know, I've seen coaches punch lockers, throw clipboards, pretty much trash the entire locker room just in a rage. They can't touch the players, they can't touch the officials, so they take their anger out on things that don't fight back. And Antiochus Epiphanes was doing just that. He couldn't be content with the loot that he had. He wasn't happy to just be alive and free after having a confrontation with Rome. He couldn't do anything to Rome, he couldn't do anything to Egypt, so he decided to take it out on Israel on his way home. By the way, I don't for one second think that it was just because Israel happened to be there when he was in a bad mood, that they just happened to be the ones in the way. The devil has fueled the wrath of nations since the fall of man, trying to exterminate God's people. The devil has used the Pharaohs. He has used the Herod family. He used Haman. He used the last of the Persians. He used the Assyrians. Today, anti-Semitism is alive and in full force. The devil has deceived so many people who will take a stand against all kinds of racism and unfairness and then look you in the eye and say that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. I don't get that. But there were some that were in Israel that Antiochus would tolerate, and that is those who turned their backs on God, had nothing to do with the beliefs of their forefathers, those who turned their back on the Holy Covenant, as the text says. The end of that last verse says he will come back and show regard to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Now let's get the last of these verses that deal with Antiochus in verses 31 through 35. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words he will turn turn to godlessness, those who act wickedly towards the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will be given understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. This goes along with what we read about the abomination in chapter 8. He sets up an altar in the temple, and inside the temple is an idol dedicated to Zeus. After sacrificing a pig, the worst unclean animal in a Jew's eyes, he sacrifices it on the altar, and then the temple was certainly defiled. And there were actually plans to even rename this temple in honor of Zeus. They were going to call it the Temple of Zeus, the god of hospitality. He tried to get the people to adapt to Greek culture and to the Greek religion, to which many people who were not loyal to the God of Israel did. So there were so many who were refusing to worship anyone but the one true God. He thought it was a good idea to just defile their temple in such a way they could no longer use it, much less even enter it. Verse 32 tells us he uses smooth words to get the unfaithful to follow along. He didn't have to threaten anyone. He just promised them rewards for following this new Greek way. In the same way, the Antichrist will persuade many people to follow him through diplomacy. Well, at least at first. He will also be successful in getting the unfaithful Jews on board with his one world religion, just like Antiochus did. I mentioned in a previous study that the Temple Institute in Jerusalem already has the vessels and the furnishings for the temple that will be rebuilt in the end times. With modern technology, this thing could be up and running within weeks. Those who don't recognize Jesus as Messiah are waiting for someone else, not realizing that Messiah has already come. This time, though, they're not expecting the Messiah to be the Son of God, as they did in Jesus' time. They will tell you that they are looking for a man just like Moses was just a man. They say they will know him because he will help them rebuild their temple. Think about that. With the picture of end times events in mind, they will know their Messiah when he helps them rebuild their temple. Tell me the stage isn't set yet. We'll get more into that in a few, but right here, just like the Antichrist, Antiochus is seen rallying up the Jews who are not loyal to God. But the rest of verse 32 has a brighter side, and I love it. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. This refers to the Maccabean revolt that we talked about in chapter 8. There's a priest named Mattathias. He stood up against the idolatry in the land, and he began to slay both Greek and Jew alike that bowed to any Greek idol. His sons joined him in the cause, and before long, they had a small army. It said that they would display strength and take action, and that they did. With just a handful of people, they resisted and pushed back over and over again. Verse 33 says, "For many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering." Enduring Word's commentary added this historical detail about it, and I quote, "In his attack on Jerusalem, Antiochus IV is said to have killed 80,000 Jews, taken 40,000 more as prisoners, and sold another 40,000 as slaves. He also plundered the temple, robbing it of approximately $1 billion by modern calculations." End quote. Many people rose up against Antiochus with the Maccabees, and many died in battle. But all of this was foretold in those final verses. The 135 specific prophecies in these first 35 verses of this chapter have been fulfilled with amazing accuracy. There's absolutely no reason at all to doubt that the remaining prophecies will also come to pass exactly like God has said. I wonder wonder how in the world anybody can see all of this and not believe. Everything God says has come to pass perfectly. No matter how crazy it sounds, no matter how unlikely it sounds, if God says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Dr. E. Schuler, English, once wrote that a man on Long Island who was able to satisfy a long-time ambition by purchasing a very fine barometer. I remember when I was a kid, I always liked the barometers. My grandpa had one. It's a fascinating thing to watch, even though I didn't understand what it meant. But when Dr. Schuler, English, unpacked this instrument, he was just upset when he found out the needle appeared to be stuck. It was on the section that said hurricane. Well, he shook the barometer vigorously, and it didn't change. So he wrote this scorching letter to the store from which he had purchased this barometer, and then on his way to work in New York the next morning, he mailed that letter to the company complaining about it. That evening, he returned to Long Island to only find out his barometer was missing, but his house was also missing. The barometer's needle had been right. There was a hurricane. A lot of people are going to find out one day that God's word was right. Everything he said come to pass. Let's go ahead and get verses 36 through 39 as we move into end times prophecy. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. But instead he will honor a God of fortresses, a God whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. He will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over the many, and will parcel out land for a price. As you can see, the text has obviously shifted from Antiochus to Antichrist. You can tell because verse 36 says he will exalt and magnify himself above every god. What was the idol that we said Antiochus placed inside the temple? An idol to Zeus. This wasn't a statue of himself. Antiochus worshipped an Olympian god, and therefore he had someone or something he held higher than himself. But not this guy. This guy will demand that everybody on the earth worship him. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, it says, "Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God." At first, it seems like this is just going to be a voluntary thing as far as worshiping him, up until about the midpoint of the tribulation, when the treaty with Israel is obviously broken and their new temple is once again defiled so that they can no longer use it, just like Antiochus did. This evil king will go one step further, though. He's going to impose restrictions on who can buy and sell without a mark of loyalty to him. If you don't worship me, you can't buy groceries. If you don't worship me, you have no paycheck, no access to your bank account, no social security, none of this stuff. When that isn't enough, he's going to make a decree that you either bow before this image or die right there on the spot. This is also foretold in Revelation 13, verse 15, "And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak, and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed." Unlike Antiochus, this man will worship nobody. According to verses 38 and 39, military strength and victory is the only thing he worships besides himself. Verse 37 says he will show no regard for the gods of his fathers. Now, nobody knows with any certainty what religious background the future Antichrist will be. Maybe he will be raised in atheism, not worshiping anyone that his ancestors did. Some people have tried to say that the Antichrist will be Jewish, and that means he will not regard the God of Israel. Others say that the Antichrist will be the 12th Imam of Islam, which would mean that he would turn his back on that faith. The Left Behind novels, which are fiction, but they make a good story, talked about the apostate church headed from the Vatican that would blend all of the world's faiths into a single religion, which they are still trying to do to this day. The prophecies of the Quran are the mirror image of ours. Their Messiah fits the bill of our Antichrist, and their Antichrist describes our Messiah. But whatever this coming Antichrist religious background, to me, his ancestry appears to be Roman, or at least to some degree, because remember in these visions, he is the little horn that comes out of the Roman Empire in the previous visions. But either way, he's going to attempt to abolish all other religions and demand that everybody worships him or else. And a strange thing is also given there in verse 37, says that he would not have the regard for the desire of women. Now, people are divided on this, and it's usually one of two things that they say that this might mean. So, the first one, some people say the desire of women was to be the one that would give the birth to the Messiah. This is why Jesus was a common name during our Lord's ministry. Barabbas was also named Jesus, Jesus Barabbas. Every woman wanted to be the one that would give birth to the Messiah. But I'm here to tell you, Mary of Nazareth was chosen by God for that. It's not going to happen a second time. So they say that this verse means that he won't regard the Messiah. He won't regard Jesus. Well, he obviously is not going to. Then there's some that say that when he doesn't have the desire of women, it means that he will be a homosexual. I'm sad to say that almost half of today's population would literally vote for the devil if he ran as a gay person. This may or may not be the case. I don't plan on being here to ask the guy, nor could I care less. But I want to offer you a third possibility to ponder. How about he doesn't care about men or women. He doesn't care about anything but himself and his own agenda. A relationship would just slow him down and complicate his plans. I don't think the Antichrist is going to have time for a relationship. But that would be kind of funny, though, if you think about it. Be right in the middle of a press conference, and then his wife calls him on his cell phone. Honey, can you bring some milk home? Or she would call him out during a press conference and publicly accuse him of cheating with an intern or something. Or maybe he'd have to miss a UN staff meeting because he had to take his kid to a ballet recital instead of taking over the world. If this guy is truly possessed and fueled by hell, he knows he's only going to have 7 years to drag as many souls as he can away from God. He isn't going to give a plug nickel for any relationship, gay or straight. Verse 39 says that he will do these things and accomplish all of this with the help of a foreign god. Just who might that be? Well, Revelation 13:2 says, "And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like that of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority." The devil will endow him with supernatural stamina, great wisdom, supernatural intelligence, great cell phone reception and a company car, no, I'm kidding, and even the ability to do signs and wonders. It also says that he will give great honor to those who follow him. Antiochus did the same thing. That might be the deciding factor that gets some people to follow the Antichrist. They might be promised a position of prestige. They might be promised fame. They might be promised political power of some kind. But what good is all of that if you knew how short-lived it's going to be? His time is short. One more part in verse 39 really stands out to me. It says they will parcel out land for a price. Is that not what they're trying to do with Israel right now? You see this. Turn on your news right now. Well, not now, after this video. Turn on your news and you will see that they are trying to get Israel to give away its land. Folks, God gave Israel that land, but other countries insist that Israel should give up a portion of their nation to the Palestinians. How would those nations like to do something like that? See if France would be willing to give up Paris. Would the U.S. like to give up California? Would Iraq be ready to surrender Baghdad? No, but that might be a part of the deal in Israel getting her new temple. Maybe they've got to give up the Gaza Strip or something else, and the Antichrist will tell them, hey, if you just give this up to satisfy them, we'll help you rebuild your temple. You know, we see in the news every day that the world is getting us prepared for that idea. And we see so many disillusioned people out there voicing their opinions that have already been deceived, and they're ready to embrace that. Let's get the rest of these verses right quick, verses 40 through 45. At the end time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he will enter countries and overflow them and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, over all the precious things of Egypt, and Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. These 5 verses paint a picture of the final conflict, the battle to end all battles. You might know it as Armageddon. Enemies from the south and enemies from the north will rally and will oppose him. The Antichrist is going to have an impressive army himself, especially if this previously so-called peaceful pacifist has disarmed the population through gun control and national disarmament. He's going to take it all and he's going to use it against you. Not only is he opposing Christians who have come to faith in the tribulation, and he is opposing Christ, who will be returning sometime during that battle, but many nations are going to turn on him. Apparently, there's going to be a lot of turmoil in Africa. I see in verse 42 that Egypt will not escape his wrath, but Libya and Ethiopia will follow at his heels, kind of like being fanboys of the devil there. Verse 41 says that he will pass through Israel, but there will be a place that he is unable to touch. But these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Where exactly is that today? Modern-day Jordan. And there is a place in Jordan that many people believe will be a safe haven for believers and for Jews who are trying to flee the Antichrist. Maybe you have heard of Petra, the stone city that still stands today. If you get a chance after this study, pull up a video on Petra. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it's built like a fortress or a sanctuary, and it has been preserved all of these years. Revelation chapter 12 speaks of the devil in the form of a dragon pursuing the woman who gave birth to the child, which is Israel. In 2 places in that chapter, it says she goes to a place prepared for her by God. Once there, the devil will send out his army, which Revelation pictures as a flood, and it won't be able to touch those that are in that place. I'll go ahead and share it with you right quick. Revelation 12, verses 15 through 17. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. To me, that sure sounds like a place where refugees can go and their army will be consumed in God's protection. But there's another passage that also makes mention of a nation seeking refuge there. We can find this in Isaiah 16, verses 1 through 5. Send the tribute lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah by the way of the wilderness to the mountain of the daughter of Zion. Then, like fleeing birds and scattered nestlings, the daughters of Moab will be at the fords of Amnon. Give us advice, make a decision, cast your shadows like night at high noon. Hide the outcast, do not betray the fugitive. Let the outcast of Moab stay with you. Be a hiding place to them from the destroyer, for the extortioner has come to an end. Destruction has ceased. Oppressors have completely disappeared from the land. A throne will even be established in loving kindness, and a judge will sit on it in faithfulness in the tent of David. Moreover, he will seek justice and be prompt in righteousness. I think we can all agree on who the righteous judge is that comes from the line of David, the same as the stone that was made without hands that toppled the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the one who will bring about the peace in verse 45 when the devil comes to his end and there is no one to help him. Revelation 19 paints a picture of this. It says, he is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. He who spoke the universe into existence, he who spoke everything in the universe into existence, as it says in John 1:1, will speak his enemies out of existence, as we see it in Revelation 19:15. And I love the way Chuck Smith put it. He is going to come down here and tell the Antichrist and all of his followers, drop dead. Thank you all for joining me. I hope to look forward to seeing you as we conclude this prophecy of Daniel in chapter 12.